literally thought I was going crazy, because that can't happen to me. There's no way in the world that could happen.
We didn't have a body. We didn't have an identified crime scene. We had no independent witnesses, and we didn't have a confession.
The police thought one of these undercover sting operations known as Mr. Big would be the perfect way to advance this investigation. Of course, this was all a setup.
Whoever was sending these letters was taking painstaking efforts to make sure that we couldn't identify them.
Every day the worry increased.
April 27th, 2002, Brandon, Manitoba. In this small community in the heart of the Canadian prairies, Darcy Chorney and his ex-wife Deborah file a missing persons report on their daughter Erin. The 18-year-old works on and off at a dry cleaner's and splits her time between parents. The last time Deborah saw Erin was 6 days earlier on April 21st.
Erin came to the apartment that day, and she was staying at her dad's house at that time, so she came for a sleepover. We had a really nice supper together, and Leslie and her spent a lot of time together. She seemed to really be enjoying spending family time together that day.
Erin Chorney was very much a typical teenager, liked to be popular, liked to engage in social activities with her friends, hanging out at movie theaters, at shopping malls, talking on the phone, texting with them, very outgoing.
She was having a few struggles. She was a little rebellious, and she wanted to spend more time with her friends, and she was focused more on herself, but she was still very family-oriented. Well, the phone rang at about 7 o'clock, and Erin said she was going out for coffee with a friend. And so that was fine. I didn't think anything of it because I thought, you know, she seemed in a good mood, and she didn't get all dressed up. She didn't put on makeup, so I didn't think she was going to a party. I really thought she'd be back.
That night, I went down to the door with her when she was about to leave. We waited for her ride to get there, and we were just talking a bit, and I didn't really want her to leave. When she left, she gave me a big hug and told me she loved me and that she'd be back soon.
Erin and Leslie had a especially close relationship until she was 8 when Erin went missing.
When Erin doesn't return that evening as promised, her mother is disappointed but not immediately concerned.
Erin had done that before, like she'd gone out with friends or met up with friends, and then they decided to go someplace, and it wasn't unusual for her to not come home like that, so we didn't worry right off the bat.
Erin loved to party, she loved to socialize, she loved to be popular. She found herself often the center of attention at some of these parties. The alcohol would be flowing, the drugs would be out. I think Erin was in some ways trying to mask some of what was going on in her own life, some of her own struggles, her parents' separation, which certainly didn't sit that well with her.
Erin usually calls her parents when she's staying out late, but not on this night.
I hadn't heard from Erin. I thought I would try phoning some of her friends to see if I could locate her. So I phoned a lot of the people that she would hang out with at different times, and nobody seemed to have seen her. So that started to make us worry more, like where was she?
The Chorneys don't want to sound alarm bells yet. They've been down this road with Erin before. But as more days pass, concern turns into a gnawing dread that something is terribly wrong.
She had gone out for a few days with her friends before, but she had never not called us or to let us know where she was.
And then further on in the week, you know, Debbie and I talked, and, you know, it's getting to be a week already, and nobody knew where she was or seen her. So we decided we should go to the police and get them involved.
The Brandon Police Service opens a missing persons case, enters Erin into a nationwide database, and sends out a press release with her photograph asking for the public's help. Dallas Lockhart is assigned as lead investigator. His first task is to question Erin's friends and acquaintances.
There was theories out there that Erin maybe went on a binge or hooked up with somebody and took off from Brandon, but those were theories. Of course, we wanted to talk with the family first because they had the most intimate knowledge of Erin and her behaviors. And then we started expanding that interview pool to include her closest friends.
I first met Erin when we were both going through some troubled times at a center here in Brandon.
Carla DeJong has known Erin since they were both 14-year-old patients battling depression at a treatment center for adolescents.
She was having emotional struggles a little bit. She was missing a bit of school and starting to give us a few problems, so Darcy and I would try to think of ways to keep her on track.
We just instantly connected and got into trouble together, slipped notes out at each other's doors. We were going through both the same kind of problems in our lives at the same time, so it was somebody to share it with.
After leaving the center, the girls become closer than ever.
When I was 17, I thought I was pregnant, and my mom took me down to go get the test, and Erin's like, "I'll wait here." So I went down, took the test, found out I was pregnant, and went straight back to my house to sit with Erin and cried. And Erin said not to worry. And it absolutely meant the world to me. It was a sigh of relief that I had somebody by my side.
My daughter's friends would probably say she was a good friend. She tried to be very supportive, and she's a good listener. She would do anything for any of her friends. She would just go the distance for them.
2 days before she went missing, she came over to meet my son for the first time. She was just totally in love with him, and she was going to spend the night, but that didn't end up happening. I still wish that she had stayed. I wish I had kept her there with me.
But according to Carla, there was no keeping Erin from her on-again, off-again boyfriend, 22-year-old Michael Bridges. He confirms that Erin was at his house on the evening of April 21st, right before she disappeared.
When I first spoke with Michael Bridges, he did tell me that he picked Erin up from her mom's residence that night and that they spent the majority of the night together. They went back to the family residence and everything was apparently lovey-dovey. She trimmed his hair for him, she rubbed a sore shoulder that he had, gave him some girlfriend advice, and then she apparently announced that she was leaving the residence to go to a friend's place, and according to Michael Bridges, that was the last he'd ever seen of her.
Bridges tells Lockhart that Erin left his house around 11:30 that night. He hasn't heard from her since.
We were really no further ahead in terms of identifying where Erin might have gone to than we were at the beginning of the investigation.
That's when Erin's parents turned to the public for help. In a press conference broadcast all across Canada, they make a desperate plea for any information that can bring their daughter home.
The police had seemingly run out of ideas. They'd hit a brick wall. There was nowhere else to go. They were no closer to finding Erin, and you could tell it was certainly taking an emotional toll on them, the Chorney family. It was tearing them apart.
I literally thought I was going crazy, because that can't happen to me. There's no way in the world that could happen.
We feel she would have called by now if she could, but if she's out there and afraid to call, we just want to hear from you, and we love you.
At this point in the investigation, Erin truly was a missing person. We didn't have a body, we didn't have a crime scene, we had no independent witnesses saying that Erin had met with foul play. It was truly becoming a whodunit type mystery for us.
The more tips that pour in, the stranger the story gets. What lies ahead is a bizarre case that no one in Brandon, Manitoba will ever forget. Brandon, Manitoba has a reputation for being one of Canada's safest places to live and raise a family. But in the spring of 2002, The disappearance of 18-year-old Erin Chorney has everyone on edge. Desperate for a single lead, the Chorney family pleads with the public for help.
If she's out there and afraid to call, we just want to hear from you, and we love you.
Almost immediately, an ominous report comes in from two local students just days after Erin's disappearance. They claim to have spotted something suspicious behind a church near their school.
The two kids are out playing, as kids often do, when they come across what they believe is a body, wrapped in a blanket, some hair sticking out. Obviously quite shocked by what they see, they run back to their school. They tell their teacher. The teacher tells the parents of these kids. The parent is the one who then contacts the police.
The two students were fairly certain in their young minds that this was a body that was being covered. We had them take us to the location, and by that time the blanket and everything was gone and there was nothing at the scene.
Police determined that the student's report is nothing more than a false alarm. But it's not the only strange account that comes into police hotlines. The press conference has sparked the public's interest in Erin's disappearance, and tips are pouring in from all over the country.
Rumors were everywhere. Erin was being spotted out east, Erin was being spotted out west, Erin was being spotted in the United States. There were reports that she had run away to join a street gang. There were reports she was working as a sex trade worker in Toronto. Well, this was a tremendous drain on police resources at a time when they needed all hands on deck. Police were being forced to spend a huge amount of time and energy chasing down these tips.
It did consume a lot of our time following up each one of these, because regardless of what our personal thoughts were, they did have to be followed up to the extent that we could.
At the same time, it was taking a huge toll on the Chorney family, who were being put in a bit of a tug-of-war here. They weren't sure who to believe, what was true, what wasn't.
The wild goose chase fails to turn up a single viable lead on the missing girl. Is it possible the truth of what happened to Erin Chorney has been hiding in plain sight?
The one thing that was consistent throughout the entire course of this investigation was that Michael Bridges was the last person that we knew Erin had been with before she disappeared.
Investigators take a harder look at Erin's former boyfriend. What they turn up has everyone very concerned.
Michael Bridges was pretty typical blue jeans, t-shirt kind of guy, but certainly carried himself with an aura of confidence. He seemed to think he was a bit of a ladies' man, God's gift to women, if you will. Certainly a lot of Erin's friends had concerns about Michael Bridges. They thought he was a bit of a bully, could be very abusive, very controlling of Erin.
He was controlling who she was talking to and who she could see, and we tried to tell her to stay away from him. We tried to tell her, you deserve better. This is not what you need in your life. I remember on one instance that he had thrown her out in the middle of winter in apparently next to no clothing, and she was stuck outside, and she had to go to the payphone to phone for help. Like, who does that to somebody? It was very disturbing.
Even more worrisome, investigators learned that the month before Erin's disappearance, the relationship took a dark turn.
On March 10th, 2002, Mike, Erin, and one of Erin's friends went out drinking and ended up back at Bridges' residence. Around bedtime, they got into some sort of an argument which escalated into a physical fight where Mike grabbed Erin by the throat and slammed her into a wall. Erin's friend came to her rescue, jumped on Mike's back. He, in turn, threw her across the bedroom and then continued his assault against Erin. It was finally broken up when Mike's mom came into the bedroom, separated everybody, and eventually drove the girls back to Erin's place for the night.
We had never known that anything like this was going on, but the more we heard, the more we thought that he did have something to do with it.
Because of the background investigation we had done on Michael Bridges, we determined that the investigation had to focus on him, and it had to focus on his level of involvement, if any, in Erin's disappearance.
And that means a more in-depth interview with Erin's boyfriend.
On paper, his answers were perfect, almost as if it was scripted. However, when we got into actually the interview portion of it, the second question I asked him was very direct. Was he at all responsible for Erin's disappearance? And I got a very weak denial no emotion, and inconsistent body language in that response.
According to friends, Erin had decided a couple of weeks before her disappearance that she didn't want anything more to do with Bridges, but it was obvious that he couldn't stay away. So how did he get back in close contact with her? A friend of Bridges named 𝐁𝐥𝐸𝐸 comes forward to tell police about a strange encounter the day of Erin's disappearance.
Bridges asked his friend to call Erin. He wanted to talk to her. While he was there, he could hear Bridges appearing to be arguing with Erin Chorney. The conversation ended. Bridges wanted to go to his mother's house to pick up her station wagon, and upon arrival there, Bridges asked 𝐁𝐥𝐸𝐸 to call Erin back. He said he wasn't done arguing with her.
They drive to a nearby 7-Eleven, and Mike again asks 𝐁𝐥𝐸𝐸 to call Erin, so he does a third time. That call happens, it concludes, and then Mike says, we're going to pick her up. They drive over to Erin's mom's place where Erin is staying. They pull into the parking lot. 𝐁𝐥𝐸𝐸 sees Erin coming out of the building. She crawls into the back seat of the vehicle, and they drive away.
But apparently, 3 was a crowd.
𝐁𝐥𝐸𝐸 was really surprised where Mike basically drives him back to his house, says, see you, buddy, get out. And that was the last time 𝐁𝐥𝐸𝐸 had ever seen Erin, was in Bridges' car.
𝐁𝐥𝐸𝐸 agrees to take a polygraph test, which indicates he's telling the truth. Lockhart asks Michael Bridges to do the same, but he refuses. Investigators are now convinced that Michael Bridges had something to do with Erin Chorney's disappearance.
Due to the nature of some of the things that had come up in the initial phases of the missing person investigation, we felt that we needed to approach it more with the likelihood that foul play was involved, although still hoping and keeping an open mind that she may turn up.
What police desperately need now is some hard evidence to back up their suspicions.
We didn't want him to be aware that he was the focus of our investigation at this point in time. So we did things such as putting a tap on his phone, conducting ground searches in his neighborhood. We put him under surveillance, hoping that some of his behaviors or lack of behaviors might give us an indication as to his level of involvement, if any, in Erin's disappearance.
In June 2002, the station wagon belonging to Michael Bridges' mother is stolen from her driveway. Not by car thieves, but by the police themselves.
We obtained judicial authorization to secretively take the car from the Bridges family and conduct a forensic examination on it. Our theory was that if Erin had met with foul play, that it either happened in the residence and the car was used to transport the body, or in fact it may have occurred in the vehicle itself.
Working quickly and carefully, the forensic ID unit processes the car for trace evidence, scouring every inch for clues inside and out.
We were looking for anything that would afford us of signs of a struggle. So we were using hemosticks, we were using our Lumelite, looking for hairs and fibers. We were doing soil samples. But basically, the frustration came in when you're doing all these tests, you're still coming back with nothing there, and it's like, okay, what are we missing?
Warrant in hand, investigators head to the Bridges' home to search for any evidence that a murder happened here.
Mike greeted us as almost as if he was expecting us, that this was an inevitable event that was going to occur. It really brought it into the public view that we are investigating this as a homicide investigation, and that Mike Bridges was our most viable suspect at this time.
We basically get into the residence, we start looking for anything that would afford us evidence of a crime. The Winnipeg Police Service aided us in this particular investigation. They brought with them a crime scope. The crime scope will highlight things like hairs, fiber, blood, saliva.
We located a mattress on a hide-a-bed which appeared to be bloodstained. But when our forensic identification unit members tested it at the scene, it did give a positive reaction. However, subsequent testing at a lab brought it up as being a false positive, and we in fact did not have a bloodstained mattress.
After a complete search of the car and house, there isn't a shred of evidence suggesting foul play. But police do find something that casts even more suspicion on Michael Bridges. It's a list of notes in which Bridges documents detail by detail the story he told police about his last night with Erin.
It became very obvious that this had to do with the interview I conducted with him earlier in the investigation. I was never able to determine, though, from Mike whether he had prepared these as notes going into the interview in anticipation of what I may ask him, or if they were notes made after the interview so that he could remember what he told me during our initial interview.
Michael Bridges is now the investigator's prime suspect. But until some real evidence surfaces, there's nothing they can do about it. Meantime, there's someone out there who believes they're on the right path with their murder investigation. Someone who claims to know what really happened to Erin Chorney.
If she's out there and afraid to call, we just want to hear from you, and we love you.
Spring 2003. It's been almost a year since Erin Chorney went missing from Brandon, Manitoba. Although foul play is suspected, forensic sweeps have failed to unearth any smoking gun that would tie prime suspect Michael Bridges to Erin's disappearance. The high-profile case has elicited plenty of alleged sightings and psychic claims, leaving many people to believe that the 18-year-old merely ran away to start a new life. That is, until a cryptic letter surfaces around the first anniversary of Erin's disappearance.
One was delivered directly to the Chorney family. They claimed to be a confession of sorts, somebody claiming to have knowledge of where Erin was. It was very disturbing.
A couple of the quotes in the letter referred to Erin being beautiful, that the ground was frozen, that this person had tried to dig her up but was unable to do so. And then they went out and said, "I'm sorry for what he did," as if they themselves weren't responsible, but they maybe knew who the perpetrator was.
Police fingerprint the paper and envelope.
We looked at DNA analysis of the lick strip on the back of the envelope and on the stamp itself. At the end of the day, we didn't get anything out of it, and that told us that whoever was sending these letters was taking painstaking efforts to make sure that we couldn't identify them.
The efforts by police prove fruitless, but it's not long before they find another equally ominous letter, which surfaces in a public restroom.
And this one appeared to be written by maybe the person responsible. It seemed more in the first person. And some of the information in that letter suggested that they were sorry for what happened to Erin, that they were feeling guilty, that they had told their friend about it, and the friend had advised them to actually surrender to the police.
The writer goes on to taunt police.
They said that we were close to finding the body, and that if we found the body, we would also find the person responsible for Erin's death. We believe the writer was at least purporting to be a female who knew Erin quite well. However, we didn't get any specific details. There was no community referenced or anything like that.
Nobody really knew what any of these letters meant. They were very vague, few specific details. There was talk of Erin being buried, of knowing who had killed her. No names, however, and the mystery continued to grow.
With no clue to the author's identity, police take another approach, running classified ads in the local newspaper. They hope to entice the writer to contact them or send additional letters that could offer up further clues. And they get a hit.
In response to the ad we put in the paper, we received the final letter from the unknown person. In this letter, they claimed to know that she was still buried because they had actually physically gone there and confirmed that Erin was still buried. It was extremely upsetting to the Chorney family, and it actually spelled out that Erin was dead at that point in time. And it was something that I don't know whether they were prepared to accept or not.
Well, certainly Brandon police were frustrated that this case didn't seem to be going anywhere, and they were really desperate for any other solution. Dallas Lockhart had attended a course about a year earlier where he learned about undercover sting operations, and when he and Doug Paulson met with the RCMP, it was suggested that perhaps that was something they could explore in this case.
Investigators meet with members of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the RCMP, to map out a new strategy.
Our most viable option was that Erin had met with foul play at the hands of someone Although we did have a viable suspect in Michael Bridges, we were always cognizant of the fact that we didn't have a body, we didn't have an identified crime scene, we had no independent witnesses, and we didn't have a confession.
But Erin's former boyfriend is still very much in investigators' sights.
Michael Bridges was certainly aware of the attention being focused on him, the rumors that were out there, and as a result, he pretty much went underground, became a bit of a hermit, a shut-in. Even his own peer group seemed to be separating themselves from him, and so Michael Bridges pretty much cut himself off from everyone else, rarely came out of his house, kept to himself.
To break the stalemate and solve the case, police have to think outside the box. Teaming up with the RCMP, they concoct a clever sting operation to expose Bridges' secrets once and for all. On September 23, 2003, surveillance watches the first act of this drama play out. An attractive undercover agent pretends to be conducting a survey for a local radio station and invites Michael to sign up for a contest. First prize, an NHL hockey game in Calgary. A month later, police listen in as Bridges is notified that he's one of the contest winners and is on his way to Calgary, all expenses paid.
Michael Bridges, this would have been like winning the lottery, a dream come true, a chance to see his favorite hockey team play, a chance at VIP treatment, to get out of town, and he took full advantage of it. Michael Bridges had a great time in Calgary, got to see his favorite hockey team play, went to a strip club, had a lot of laughs, a lot of drinks, a lot of fun. Michael even met another winner of the same contest as he, and the two of them very much hit it off.
When the two contest winners return home, police follow as Bridges' new friend drives him back to his mother's house. And over the next few months, surveillance teams observe the two men spending more and more time together.
Well, this guy, who I'll refer to as Brock, nothing all that physically impressive about him. Stocky build, mustache, average-looking guy. But it's clear he was living the good life, and Michael Bridges was very much impressed by this. In fact, Bridges at one point helped Brock find an apartment in Brandon. Brock said he wanted to expand his business interests, although it wasn't entirely clear what that meant.
In early December 2003, police follow Bridges and Brock to a small town northwest of Brandon. There, another man passes Brock an envelope stuffed with cash.
It appeared to police as if this guy was taking Bridges out to do some sort of pickup, almost as if he was grooming him for a future mission of some sort, acting a bit as a mentor towards Bridges.
Of course, Bridges has no idea that he is a pawn in an elaborate scheme. But if it all goes to plan, it won't be much longer before the world knows what really happened to Erin Chorney. It's been a year and a half since the disappearance of Erin Chorney. Police in Brandon, Manitoba continue to surveil their only suspect, Michael Bridges, as he becomes further and further entrenched in an elaborate sting operation.
The police thought one of these undercover sting operations, known as the Big Boss or Mr. Big, would be the perfect way to advance this investigation. Well, the ultimate goal here was to find Erin Chorney, learn what happened to her, and to find out whether Michael Bridges had anything to do with her disappearance. At the same time, it would have been just as good for police to learn that he had no involvement, that he wasn't a suspect.
After winning a trip to Calgary, Bridges has been hanging out with another contest winner, a man named Brock, who's taken Michael under his wing. Bridges has no idea his new buddy is an undercover cop. The two men meet regularly for lunch and beers. Then one day, Bridges' new friend gets a phone call from someone he calls the boss and recommends Bridges for a job in what appears to be an organized crime syndicate.
Michael Bridges certainly began to climb his way up the ladder. He was going from a silent observer to somebody who was being given direct responsibilities, making deliveries on his own, being given a lot more power. This certainly made him happy. As that progressed, he certainly found himself very comfortable with these people, thought they had a lot in common. These were the type of guys he wanted to spend his life hanging around with.
Brock is slowly but surely winning Michael Bridges' trust and feeding on his weakness for easy money and the good life. But if Bridges wants into the organization for real, he'll first have to reveal any and all past crimes to the big boss.
Although it wasn't explicitly stated exactly what this organization was, it was made clear to Michael Bridges that this wasn't the kind of group that you just bought a membership for. You had to prove your loyalty over a period of time, work your way up through various menial tasks, prove that you could be depended on, that you were trustworthy. Well, the number one trait to be successful in this organization was to be honest about yourself, about things you were involved with, things you witnessed.
To drive that point home, undercover officers stage a dramatic scene for Bridges' benefit.
Police set it up so that some money had supposedly gone missing. A girlfriend of a gang member had run off with it. Brock got Bridges to help track this woman down to a motel room just north of Winnipeg, and while Bridges sat in the vehicle watching, Brock went in and appeared to brutally assault this woman, who was being played by an undercover police officer. They went full Hollywood for this. Blood capsules, hair pulling, clothes ripping, throwing her down on a bed, throwing her against a door frame. Bridges thought this was all very real as Brock came out, bloodied knuckles and all. Of course, this was all a setup to get Bridges comfortable talking about violence against women and would pave the way for where this investigation was heading.
Where it's heading, police hope, is a full confession about what Bridges did to Erin Chorney.
It was made clear to Michael Bridges that he had to be very honest with the boss of this organization, that he had to come clean about anything he may have done in his past that could reflect poorly on him or the organization, but that it didn't matter what Bridges had done. The boss was all-powerful, all-knowing, and could take care of any problem. Failure to be honest with him, though, would result in the boss finding out anyways.
Nearly 2 years since Erin vanished, the sting operation is in its final stretch. Michael Bridges meets Brock at a Winnipeg restaurant to prepare for his meeting with the big boss the following week. Their entire conversation is being secretly recorded.
Michael Bridges had spoken very little about Erin Chorney to this organization, never mentioning her by name, but he knew that his meeting with the boss was looming, that he had an important decision to make, that it was time for him to finally come clean about Erin and his background. Well, as Bridges is describing what happened to Brock, he says this was a terrible, tragic accident. The two of them were having an argument. He says Erin was the aggressor. He pushed her out of frustration. She fell, but says this was never supposed to happen, and it was a tragic accident. But Brock shows absolutely no visible reaction to this at all. He doesn't want to tip his hand, wants Bridges to think this is the sort of thing they hear all the time, the sort of thing that they can make go away very easily.
In Brandon, Manitoba, an elaborate sting is playing out. It's the last opportunity for detectives to find out once and for all if Michael Bridges is behind the disappearance of one-time girlfriend Erin Chorney. As part of the setup, Bridges has been told that he can only join a powerful underworld organization if he comes clean about all his past crimes in a face-to-face meeting with the syndicate boss. Bridges has told his friend Brock that Erin died in a tragic accident, but investigators aren't buying it.
When Brock goes back to his police handlers and they discuss what Bridges has told them, there's certainly a sense of relief, but a feeling that there's a lot more to the story, that Bridges hasn't told them everything. They need to find Erin's body, and it's decided that Brock must go back to Bridges and find out exactly what happened that night.
Bridges and his friend meet again the next day, and this time Michael is free and easy with the details.
Well, after having told Brock part of the story, Bridges, I think, felt a real sense of relief, but realized that he now had to come clean about exactly what happened, revealing that it wasn't a push that killed Erin, but something far more cold-blooded. He revealed how he choked her, finished her off, and then buried her in a nearby cemetery. It was a surreal scene. You had Brock and Bridges sitting in a crowded restaurant, many diners nearby enjoying breakfast or an early lunch. All the while, Bridges is revealing the innermost details of one of the most notorious homicides that had happened in this community.
Bridges takes the undercover officer to the place where he hid Erin's body.
Well, Bridges had gone to a cemetery where his father worked. He noticed a freshly dug grave in a secluded area. It was around midnight after he'd killed Erin that he went back to that grave, dug it about 2 feet deeper, put her body inside and covered it up.
Bridges said that the grave was marked with the last name of Brodsky or Brodsick. We were able to determine that a lady by the last name of Brodsick had died in January of 2002, and that her placement in the cemetery was consistent with where Mike described. We were able to obtain a search warrant to conduct what we refer to as a probe of that gravesite.
Late at night, a forensic team uses a jackhammer to excavate small sections of the frozen earth. The first 5 probes fail to turn up anything.
It's a covert operation. The judge was very explicit in his direction to us. You shall not disturb the existing grave below. So we were trying to be respectful of that and obviously stay within that frame. So we were going around the 3-foot level, and we were at the 6th hole. And one of the things the undercover operator had found out from Bridges is that he'd wrapped her in bags, but also that he'd used a blanket. It was that piece of blanket that we finally found, and it felt so good because it's there and you have it. And the only way for him to have known that is if he was there or he did it.
February 12, 2004. In a Winnipeg hotel room, the surveillance team prepares for Michael Bridges' final confession, the one they expect him to make to Mr. Big.
Well, although the police now had a confession on audio, what they really wanted was to get this confession on video. Well, Michael Bridges had said very little about Erin Chorney to this organization, never mentioning her by name, but he knew that his meeting with the boss was looming and that he had a very important decision to make. Either he could come clean about what had really happened or face the consequences.
Will Michael Bridges finally reveal everything he knows about what happened that April night?
The police wanted to build as airtight and solid a case as they could against Bridges. Well, this is all under the guise of a dress rehearsal moments before the boss is going to enter the room. Brock suggests that they go through Bridges' story one more time just to make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And as a result, Bridges gives perhaps his most revealing confession yet.
Bridges tells the undercover officer that the night he brought Erin home, they argued. He describes grabbing his girlfriend by the neck and choking her until she fell to the floor unconscious. She is still breathing, but he decides he has no choice but to finish what he started. He fills the bathtub with water and holds her head under for several long minutes.
It was quite chilling to see Michael Bridges recount in graphic detail how he ended the life of someone he claimed to love. There seemed to be no remorse, no real emotion displayed by him, just a matter-of-fact recall of events. Of course, throughout this, Brock had to maintain his composure. He showed no visible signs of reacting to this. Inside, you had to know he was burning up.
The officer has one more question for Michael Bridges. Why had he originally said Erin's death was an accident, then changed his story?
Well, police wanted to make sure at no point was Bridges coerced or induced to give a false confession or exaggerate what he had done here. Police asked him why his initial story about what happened to Erin was lacking in detail and why he changed his story. Bridges said that he was simply nervous about offering up too many details to such a horrible crime.
With all the investigators' questions now answered and the confession documented on tape, only one scene is left to play out. Not with Mr. Big, as Bridges expects, but with the Brandon police.
Once we had confirmation that the final confession had been obtained, the rest of the plans fell in place. We had a search warrant ready to go so that we could attend to the gravesite where Erin's body had been concealed.
After 2 long years, the mystery of Erin Chorney's disappearance has finally been solved.
We were happy to bring somebody to justice. We were happy to bring Erin home for her family. Yet at the same time, it was the conclusive proof that Erin was dead and she would never be coming back to her family as they hoped she would.
They took us to a room. They said that they had something to tell us, and then they told us that they had arrested Michael Bridges and that he had said that she was in the grave site in Brandon Cemetery.
I don't think anybody really wanted to believe that Erin had been murdered in the manner that she had been. At the end of the day, it was a pretty cold-hearted murder that occurred.
When we did find out what happened, it was like our worst nightmare had come true that we had tried to put out of our head.
It's a feeling that I hope that anybody that I know never has to experience.
I was living with my boyfriend and the phone rang and he passed me the phone. He said, "It's Debbie." I was so scared to grab that phone. I knew instantly it was bad news, and I grabbed the phone and I said, "Hi," and she said, "We have news." And I fell to pieces. I fell apart. She didn't even need to tell me. I knew it was bad news.
June 2005, Michael Bridges finally stands trial for the first-degree murder of Erin Chorney and comes face-to-face with the undercover cop who brought him down.
At the end of the day, Bridges revealed something only the killer would know. In reality, Michael Bridges, through his own words, through his own actions, convicted himself.
June 29, 2005. After a short deliberation, the jury finds 24-year-old Michael Bridges guilty of first-degree murder. He is sentenced to life with no parole. But while one mystery is solved, another remains. Who wrote the anonymous letters?
Nobody's ever been able to make any inroads into who wrote them, and I think once Bridges was arrested and the case went to trial, that any investigation pertaining to these letters sort of ceased at that point.
There was nothing we could really do. Very frustrating to receive these letters, and to this day, we still don't know where they originated from. Professionally, I think it's safe to say that this is a once-in-a-career investigation for us here at the Brandon Police Service. I don't anticipate ever being involved in anything like that again.
There's a huge lesson to be learned. Be treated the way you're meant to be treated. Don't take anything less than that. Don't let people abuse you. Don't let them control you.
Sometimes now we can deal with things, you know, go to work and concentrate on your job, and it's not the utmost thing in your mind, but there's always times of the year that are harder than others.
It's still day to day. Never goes away.